What's going on, Midnight Mafia? Welcome to Hell Month. And I know Hell Month, for me at least, has already arrived because this is my third time recording this story. The first time, the battery went. The second time, the screen went, which has never happened. But from today, October 1st, leading up to Halloween, I have 20 different stories for you that will bring you to the edge of your seat and you might just fall off. Now, 12 of those stories are going to be right here on Mr. E Files. 4 of them are going to be exclusive podcasts on Mystery Files with Mr. E, which you can find on Spotify, Amazon, or Apple. And not to mention, I just came out with the Midnight Mafia Assemble Mix 2.0, which you got the Assemble on the front and the Midnight Mafia on the back. Let's go. Not to mention, next week, Hell Month merch is dropping. Not that you care, you don't have to, I'm just saying. Okay, so 12 on Mr. E, 4 on the podcast, then another 4, of course, these will be the more type of crazy supernatural ones. Those 4 will be on Shadows in the Wild, my second channel. So, right there, that's 20 stories in 30 days. I don't know if I can do it. I'm gonna need your guys' help. So, the only way you can really help me is to try to get each one of these videos with every part of your might up to at least 50 likes, because I need the algorithm to just bite it one. That's it. But anyway, I appreciate you guys so much, so let's get into the story right now. You to imagine that you're sitting at your house completely unaware of anything that's outside, but someone is watching you. They know your routines, they know when you are alone. And when they strike, it's not just to kill, but to destroy. And what if you found out that person that you thought you knew so well, the one you trusted, harbored an obsession so dark that it ended in unspeakable horror? This woman's life was snatched away in a way that nobody saw coming. And by the end of this story, I'm gonna ask you a question. Who do you think did it? And when I ask you that, I want you to answer in the comments, because then after that, I will reveal. And I think you're gonna be stunned. So the main person in our story, this lovely woman, Megan Landowski, she had this deep passion for dance, and she was really good at it. I mean, since her first ballet lesson was just as a little preschooler. She had been hooked on this, taken in, gliding across the floor with nothing but grace and precision. And by the time she became a teenager, her talent was undeniable. In fact, she was so good that she earned a spot at Churchland High School, which is a prestigious arts academy in Portsmouth, Virginia. Now, this should have been a dream come true for Megan, but she found herself, out of her element, missing her old friends, and so she ended up transferring back to Woodrow Wilson High. Still her passion for dance remained unwavering, but her ambitions were clear, that she actually wanted to make a career out of it. And outside of dance, Megan was everything that you would expect from a happy, well-adjusted teen. She was academically gifted. Her and her family had a large circle of friends who just admired her. But no one could have predicted the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface in that town. It was April 10th, 2008. A normal day, or, so it seemed. Woodrow Wilson High had an early release. And like many of her classmates, Megan was so excited just to, take a beat, go home, and relax. So this is what we know, that she actually left the school at 12:30, and she headed straight for her family's home in the quiet Simonsdale neighborhood. And once she got there, she decided, to pick up the phone and to call her mother, Angela. And of course, she just left her this cheerful voicemail like she usually did, and it just said,
"I'm home safe, Mom. Love you."
And she was hungry, so at this point, she decided to kind of go into the kitchen and she made a sandwich. But Megan, while she was making the sandwich, was kind of interrupted by something that was going on outside. And it wasn't anything crazy, it was just, like a noise, just enough to kind of pique your attention. And it made her pause, and we don't know exactly what she heard. Maybe it was a footstep or the door creak. Maybe it was nothing at all. But what happened next was far from nothing. Okay, so fast forward about 3 hours later, so this would be at about 4 p.m. Megan's stepfather, named Chris Scott, he arrived home. And, expecting the usual warm greeting from his stepdaughter. But instead, he was greeted with nothing but silence. So Chris, at this point, decided, to walk through the house, calling her name, Megan, where are you? And his footsteps kind of echoed through the halls until he came upon a scene that was straight out of a nightmare. Megan was there, laying face down in the middle of the hallway, naked from the waist down, her hands bound in duct tape. A parent's worst dream. Not to mention that blood was everywhere. It was on the walls, on the floors, soaked into her clothing. She had been savagely attacked. And Chris knew immediately that Megan was gone. So at this point, he's frantic. So he called 911 with his voice kind of like, trembling. There's blood everywhere. I'm literally standing in it, he said. And that's when the Portsmouth police arrived on scene. And they found Chris right in front of the lawn, utterly shaken. And they led him back to the squad car, asking him, to stay away while they entered the house. And what they saw inside the house was horrifying. They walk in and they just see Megan's body, surrounded by a pool of blood. She had been stabbed over 40 times. And it was clear from the condition of the crime scene that her final moments had been brutal and desperate. But the autopsy would later reveal that not only the stabbings, but also that Megan had been viciously assaulted. And one detective even said out of all the years that he's been on the job, this was the most terrifying crime scene he had ever entered. So investigators at this point quickly started trying at least to piece together the evidence, because 2 knives were missing from the kitchen. And though only one was recovered, discarded down a drain a few hundred feet from the house, something else they found was very important. And what they found was the killer's blood. In the frenzy of the attack, he must have cut his hand. Not to mention, there were footprints everywhere. These bloody shoe prints that just went throughout the house, leading detectives to believe that the killer had circled the property multiple times before entering. He was literally stalking Megan like prey before he attacked. And now, it's time to figure out who could have done this. Megan, didn't live a high-risk lifestyle. She wasn't involved with dangerous people or hanging out in the wrong places or doing the wrong things. I mean, this was a suburban neighborhood in broad daylight. Nothing about this screamed random crime. And the detectives had a disturbing thought. What if Megan had known her killer and this was actually a personal crime? So the first person they questioned obviously was Chris Scott, Megan's stepfather. It's standard procedure to, question the people closest to the victim. And while Chris appeared heartbroken, detectives had to be sure. I mean, after all, he was the one who found the body. So as Chris is answering their questions, with his heart kind of breaking, he ended up pointing them into a different direction. A name he thought that they should, go and look into. His name was Robert Hick. And Hick had been a friend of Chris's, a fellow Navy tech. I mean, the two had actually worked together and had been close, so close that Hick had been a regular at their house. But all of that changed one day when Megan confided in her mother that Hick was abusing her. So immediately, Chris cut ties with his friend, and he even reported him to NCIS. I mean, Megan was even scheduled to testify against Hick, and his entire career and life was on the line. A strong motive, no doubt, but when police checked Hick's alibi, they hit a wall. Hick claimed that he hadn't left the Navy base all day, and security footage actually confirmed his story. So maybe he's out of the picture for the murder, though he's still in deep trouble for all that abuse. His computer was found to have contained over 200 images of, I can't say it on here, but you can imagine the worst type of things you can find on a computer, earning him an indictment and a dishonorable discharge from the Navy. But despite their thorough investigation into Hick, detectives were kind of back to square one. I mean, who could have done this? So investigators went back and just combed through the scene. They collected over 120 fingerprints, countless footprints, and other pieces of forensic evidence, but nothing led to a definitive answer. DNA from that scene, the blood, that was sent to state and national databases, but no match came back. And then the investigation kind of slowed and months passed by. And by August, detectives had scoured Megan's circle at Woodrow Wilson High, and they were actually preparing at this point to question students that had been from her previous school, Churchland High, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a new lead surfaced. Believe it or not, it came from a random tip on Megan's exact 17th birthday, no less, from a school bus driver who suggested that they should look into this boy named Robert Lee Barnes, a former classmate of Megan's. And Barnes wasn't someone who had initially stood out in their investigation. I mean, he was a talented violinist, considered one of the brightest students at Churchland. And when detectives sat down with him, they were struck by how confident and friendly that he seemed. I mean, he didn't appear to be nervous or rattled by any of their questions. But that calm demeanor kind of waved away a little bit when they asked him to provide a DNA sample. And Barnes said, he kind of hesitated, claiming that he needed to ask his mother first for permission to do so. So the detective said, okay, and they let him go, but making a mental note to follow up. But they didn't have to, because Barnes the next day surprised them by showing up, offering to provide a sample. Yeah, so he just came in the next day, and he requested an evidence bag, and he said, how do I do this? And he was actually chewing gum, so he just, kind of spit the gum into the bag. And the detectives, while skeptical, they accepted the gum and sent it in for analysis. So as the investigation just kept ramping up, the question on everybody's mind was very simple. Who could have done this? Could it have been Chris, Megan's stepfather, the man who found her, lifeless body? After all, he was the first on the scene, covered in her blood, his voice trembling on that 911 call. Or, have we thought about this, was it Angela, her own mother, hiding something far darker beneath her grief? And what about Robert Hick, the Navy tech who had been exposed for abusing her and had every reason to try to keep her silent before she testified against him? I mean, yeah, his alibi checked out, but sometimes even the most ironclad alibis have been broken. And then there's this mysterious tip from a school bus driver. I mean, could they have known something about this or been involved? And then, lastly, what about Robert Lee Barnes, the quiet violinist with a shocking fixation of Megan, who was suddenly thrust into the spotlight? Could he have harbored this hidden rage that no one saw coming? Or was there someone else lurking in the shadows, waiting for that perfect time to strike? And as these dark suspicions spread, one thing became painfully clear, that someone close to Megan had betrayed her. But who? Okay, everybody take a breath, take a beat. Things are about to get more intense as well, but let's pause for one moment. If you yourself were in this investigation, who would be your top suspect as of right now? I want you to right now write it in the comments. And I don't want you to cheat. I want you to write it right now in the comments. Pause it if you have to. Tell me if it's somebody who you think I've mentioned, or if it's possibly somebody that I haven't mentioned at all yet. It's all up to you right now. Let me know if you like to get involved in things like this to get your mind going and think for yourself as if you were a detective. Okay, so for Barnes, the results came back quickly. No match in DNA. But there was something strange about the report. The DNA extracted from his gum did not belong to a male. Yep, it was female. Barnes had tricked them. But why? So the next day, Barnes and his mother went back into the police station, and when the police asked him why he didn't give a sample of his DNA, Robert responded he had the gum. And that's when one of the officers slammed the DNA report right in front of his face and pointed to the gender of the subject, clearly marked as female. At this point, Barnes asked one of the detectives to, please close the door. And with that done, he asked, this happened on a Thursday, right? And the detectives realized he was referring to the day of the murder. And twice during Barnes's statements, his mother asked for a timeout, and said, she needed to confer with her son. And on each occasion, they went out to talk in their car, and after the second conference, Barnes said he was ready to tell the truth, finally, about what happened. According to Barnes, Meghan invited him over on Thursday. However, when he arrived and, knocked on the door, there was no reply. So he got kind of concerned and, circled the house looking for Meghan. And he found this open window, so he climbed right through, just as any good friend would do. And at this point, right when he got in through the window, he barely set foot inside the house when he was confronted by a masked man holding a gun. And the man ordered him to tape Meghan's hands together and to, kind of rough her up a little bit. And then, to have intercourse with her. And the man then walked to the kitchen and returned with the knife. And then that guy started stabbing Meghan, while Barnes just stood by, unable to do anything. And finally, the man handed him the bloody knife, telling him to, go get rid of it, warning him not to say anything or his family would be killed. And before he left, though, just to be precise, the man told him to hold out his finger, and then he cut it, ensuring that the blood would be found at the crime scene. So according to Barnes, he had walked home after witnessing this horrendous murder. And then he kind of, washed up and then practiced orchestra. He tried to, act normal, he said, because he was afraid that the masked man would carry out his threat and hurt his family. I mean, this was the story that Robert Barnes told the Portsmouth detectives, genuinely expecting them to believe it. For all of you that thought it was far-fetched, well, they didn't believe it either, of course. And they gave no indication of that, though, during the interrogation. Instead, they asked Barnes for a new DNA sample. And now that he could breathe a little easier and that he had now explained how his blood and semen had ended up at the crime scene, he was more than happy to provide it. And with his actual DNA sample, when they tested it against the blood found at the scene, of course, it was a match. Robert Lee Barnes was Meghan's killer. And his made-up little story didn't last for long, because in the end he ended up confessing, admitting that there was no masked man, no elaborate plot. It had been him all along, driven by this obsessive fixation on Meghan that she never reciprocated. And he had told Meghan about his feelings and that he really liked her. But Meghan, was just not feeling the same way romantically, and said it would be better, if they just stayed friends. So basically, he was friend-zoned, and that's what tore his mind apart and made him become a killer. And in 2009, Barnes struck a deal with prosecutors accepting a 42-year sentence for Meghan's murder and assault. But one question does remain: why did he do it? I mean, why take such brutal, monstrous action against someone who he said he really loved and was his friend? I mean, Barnes never gave a clear answer. But those who knew him suspected that this obsession simply drove him to madness. So literally, I guess only one question is left. Did you guess the correct killer? Alright guys, thank you so much for watching the first installment of Hell Month. It's going to be like every other day with this stuff, but to entertain you for tomorrow, if you can't wait till the next day, watch this story right here. I got you guys, and you're actually really going to love this one. I'll see you next time. Cheers.